Well, Jennifer Coffindaffer, thank you so much for joining us. And you're one of my top three favorite voices to hear about what's happening in cases. And so, anytime we have an opportunity to hear from you, especially when something as big as what happened in the Bryan Kohberger case happened, it's such an honor. And I just want to thank you and honor you publicly, because anytime I have any questions about anything, I message you. And as soon as you're able to, you message me back and help me make sense of things. So, thank you for your expertise. Thank you for being a light in this community. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Tyler. Thank you so much.
Well, one of the things that I think was really interesting, and I saw that you finally posted a version that I've seen that's not written with terrible handwriting, is for looking at this list. I was calling it seized items list. You were calling it inventory list. It's just a list of items that were taken from Bryan Kohberger, and we can go through it if we need to really fast. Or I'd love to hear your thoughts on what is it that was sticking out to you from that.
Well, first, I think it's very important for audience members to know that this is what we call in the FBI FD 597, which is basically just a sheet documenting things you take or things you release. In this case, it was obviously things that were seized. So you'll see that check mark in that box. And the reason this is important is many people think this is all there is, but there isn't. There's what we call FD 302s, and that documents how these items were seized. It's going to say who was there. They are going to do a sketch of the area. There's going to be a photograph log where each thing was found, who found each thing. It's very detailed. This is simply, Judge, this is my required return as demanded by law, so you know what we took. So not the details surrounding that. So I always like to clear that up, because I've seen a lot of comments, what a shoddy job was done, nothing's denoted. Well, that would never be denoted on this document.
Yeah. I thought that's interesting too. I saw you make mention of that on your Twitter feed, and I was a little bit confused by that. So I'm glad to have your explanation of what is what. One of the things that was sticking out to me was the vast number of computers that was taken. And so people kept saying to me yesterday, well, that's probably all the computers in the house, anybody in the whole family's computers, but they weren't taking anybody else's in the family's like cell phone or other devices. And so do you think Bryan Kohberger had a bunch of computers, or did you read into that at all?
So basically what the FBI was looking for, that evidence response team that would have conducted the search, was anything and everything that could have been possibly evidentiary related to the crime. So if Bryan Kohberger had access to the computer, there would be reason for them to take that computer, because obviously he could have been conducting searches and so on and so forth that could be relevant, or sending emails from a father's computer, from his mother's computer, thinking that nobody would seize that. So it was quite right for them to seize the electronic devices that were there.
I'm curious to find out what they find in it. If we start working our way through this list, I thought when we see them sort of detail knives throughout this 50 or so items, they typically will say, like we see on the fifth item down, Smith & Wesson pocket knife, a cutlery knife with a leather sheath. It just says knife in the front. The biggest question, and one of the questions that came in on Twitter, was surrounding that knife. Is there a possibility that that knife is the murder weapon?
I consider it a low possibility. I think they would have outlined what kind of knife it was. But we all know, who have dealt with knives, hunters and so forth, and just people who need knives, sometimes knives don't have any particular markings on them. It doesn't say the make, it doesn't say the brand. And so I would believe that he could not, whoever prepared this couldn't more specifically say.
So then the book with underlining on page 118, you caught a bombshell on this, if I've ever seen anybody catching a bombshell, because you've been sort of connecting the pieces the whole time. Is there a connection to Elliot Rodgers? Is there a connection to Papa Rodgers? And so tell me what you've discovered about page 118, obviously hypothetical or potential.
Yeah. And again, we cannot know the answer to whether Papa Roger, and again, that's another uniqueness, right? Everyone knows the last name Rodgers. most people have an S at the end of their name. Elliot Rodger is Roger, and Papa Roger is Roger without the S. That's just a unusual spelling that I think is worthwhile to denote. Um, he has a manifesto, he meaning Elliot Rodger, and in that manifesto, it really, in my belief, describes, I think, what, if indeed Bryan Kohberger committed these murders, what his psyche much was like. And so I
I
find it,
pulled up page 118.
oh, good. There, you've got it there. And you can see those details there are very relevant, in my opinion, to what transpired with the Idaho 4. And so
He says women must be punished for their crimes of rejecting such a magnificent gentleman as myself. All of those popular boys must be punished. This is sickening. I mean, it just is basically outlining like they deserve to die.
right. It's a warped view. It's a view of rejection throughout their whole lives that they've had to really endure. And I say endure because that's how I believe it felt to Elliot and possibly to Bryan as well. And that manifested itself into sheer hate and loathing of women. And that's why they were able to commit the heinous crimes they committed, if indeed Bryan Kohberger is guilty. So I'm not saying this is him. I cannot emphatically say that without the proof of where those Papa Roger postings happened. But I can tell you, as you know, I'm still down this rabbit trail. The Sheath comment and many of the other comments were very unique and specified components of this case. And that had me concerned right away when I read those. As well as
it had me concerned too.
What's that? Sorry.
When I said it had me concerned too, and that's an interesting thing that you're pointing out. Like typically Rodgers is spelled without the D. Papa Rodgers is the direct spelling of Elliot Rodgers. And so we're not saying that there's a connection, but if you certainly wanted to try to build a case, there's no lack of evidence one way or another to say that Papa Rodgers was likely Bryan Kohberger, if Bryan Kohberger is responsible for what took place.
Right.
So other things they took, AT&T bill, not much to think through that. The Glock 22 Generation S 40 caliber gun.
I did want to comment on that, though. A lot of people wonder, why did they take identifying information, the registration, the AT&T bill? They seemed benign. Well, they're really not benign, because it's a way to say, listen, not only was his name on this bill, he had this bill, he was paying for this bill, because the defense could try to say, listen, this wasn't really a phone he was paying for, he was using. And so it's just always great, and we always made sure we did this, is get proof that whatever evidence you're having, that you can directly link to that individual by possession, we call it. So just wanted to comment on all those documents you see there and explain why.
That's great. It's something I had never thought of. That's a great way to think about that. And I know that if you look at the traffic camera from the time that Bryan Kohberger got stopped in Moscow, that's actually the way that they identified his phone number, was because they asked him his phone number during the body cam footage. They could go back and watch it, and they confirmed his phone number and were able to get data that way. So definitely an interesting point. Folder containing vehicle paperwork, Acer laptop, one of many computers we're going to see, green leafy substance in a green container, documents, which seems pretty vague, and more green leafy substances.
Yeah, I want to talk, Tyler, about the green leafy substance, because people are saying, well, what is, and they don't say it's marijuana. We're not allowed to say that. If it wasn't field tested, we're just going to say green leafy substance. But I think we can make I believe it is going to be marijuana. And the reason they took that is because there is no recreational use of marijuana allowed in Pennsylvania. It's not a legal drug right now. And beyond that, there was a prescription fee, so it's possible he could have had a prescription for it, but did his parents? If they didn't have that, they would have to take it because it's contraband, and you can't leave contraband at the site of a search.
Wow. Well, that's an interesting point in perspective. I would assume it's marijuana unless he was like building his own pizza seasoning, got some oregano or some rosemary ground up. but I seriously doubt that that's what's happening. A white paper with a password. I found that interesting because who has a piece of paper with their password laying around?
Well, this is really important to investigators because it's going to make their their review of those computers go so much quicker. Because you would believe that that password could go to one of those computers, and this way they don't have to spend the time trying to decipher and figure out the password. It's right there. So that's why they took that.
Power cable, cell phone, 3 magazines, empty.
I want to talk
Books.
really quick about that. Even the power cable, people were saying, well, power cable doesn't have anything to do with evidence. But it's the worst thing when you get back to the office and you're starting your process for forensically looking at a computer and there's no power source or
Yeah,
no power. Then you're trying to go out to Best Buy and find a power source. So you have to take the power source.
that's good. What about the empty caliber magazines or empty magazines for the gun? Anything
Right.
there?
I think he probably just purchased this gun. I don't see any reference to magazine or to ammunition. So I
Yeah.
think it's new. And they also have the box, I recall. I think the box was
Um,
on.
black face mask. We see this multiple times.
So important. A lot of people said, well, it's in and around COVID, even though it's well past COVID where everybody has to wear a mask. But they would have written a surgical type mask. They wrote a black mask. I'm to believe this is a black mask, like we would imagine a ski mask or a sort. And obviously, that's why that's important. And as your audience is sort of going through this list, there's certain things that I'm just going to throw in my kit bag right now if I'm going to commit a crime, and I'm throwing the mask, all of them in my kit bag.
That's a
And my
great point.
magazine. So I've got 2 in there right now.
So I have one mask personally, right? You know what I mean? As a person who sometimes goes skiing or snowboarding, I have one mask. I, I find it hard to believe that just the average person's going to have 4 or 5 black face masks or ski masks. So pretty telling there. And then something that's kind of new about him, and I'm sure over the course of the next year or however long it is until trial actually starts, we're going to be learning a lot about things like prescriptions and diagnosis. And so there's a prescription, and it just has me curious, what's the prescription for?
Right. It is very curious. Again, is it for that marijuana? We don't know. We have no idea what it's for. Is it for something more important than that? Was the prescription in his name?
Yeah.
Was it in somebody else's name? But he had it. There's all sorts of things that prescription could mean, and we don't know at this point what or why they took it.
Now, I read somewhere, and hopefully you can give some clarity, and you may not be able to because you might not know the full intricacies of it. But in order for him to be part of the PhD program in criminology, I read that he had to have an FBI level 2 background check. Does that consist of mental health clearance, or is it just sort of like an enhanced criminal check?
It's more of a criminal check. And we know I recently was really just so blessed and excited about writing my first paper. And I don't want to say mine because I co-authored it with Tom Boshow, who's an
Mhm.
award-winning writer. People Magazine published it, not the whole thing, but I later
Wow.
tweeted about it. And in there, we show that he previously passed an FBI background check. So we know he has passed an FBI background check.
Okay. Yeah, I saw the paper that you wrote. I'm so excited for you. I'm
Uh,
actually hoping you get your own TV show. I messaged you that the other day. I'm like, wouldn't that be
oh,
awesome if Jennifer Coffindaffer had her own television show? I feel like you could do really well on one, and I think people would love to hear from you.
thanks. I
Black
keep
gloves.
thinking Brian Minton and I should have a little half an hour on News Nation, coffee, where we just cut it up about just the different cases. Um, he's
All in favor, say aye in the chat. All opposed, don't say anything.
He's just so great. That's how I really even got started in this business. Was my first day was with him. So
You know, you and Bryan Minton, the thing that is most appealing to me about both of you is you're sort of cut from the same cloth. You're coming at it from different perspectives, but you shoot just right down the middle all the time. It's not overdrawn with emotions. We're not getting things that might be speculation, that might not be true. It's just like it just is what it is. And that's why I'm constantly drawn to both of you guys on what you're posting and talking about. I've been missing him a lot on this case though, because he's been so in depth on the Murdaugh trial, and there's a lot of good things happening in the Bryan Kohberger case, and I'd like to hear it from him. But I'm so glad to have you. Sleuthy Goosey's another one that I feel like does a lot of research and ties everything she says to a source, which I think is important. So, black gloves, one black hat, one black mask again.
Throwing all that in my kit. I got my kit right over here. Yep. My go kit.
Personal identifying documents.
I say it that way, Tyler, because if somebody was going to commit a crime, at least in my experience, they have go kits and they keep them in their trunk, and they have them for when they're going to commit a crime. And a lot of people could say, "Are you kidding me? I have black masks. I have a black this. I have clothes where I dress all in black." But you combine it with the allegations in this case, and you do have probable cause that he committed this crime. It's something that needs to be considered.
I'm constantly reminding some of the folks who want to try to defend Bryan Kohberger's innocence that yes, there's a presumption of innocence in the American justice system, but there's dozens of pages of evidence against him, and he has been charged for 4 felony counts of murder. So while we do believe in his innocence and we believe in the American justice system, we also believe in the other part of the American justice system that points out the reasons why he has been apprehended. But I wonder, when you said that, one of the questions I had roll around in my mind was, do you think that he potentially had committed a crime, like let's say in Pennsylvania or New York or New Jersey, somewhere that would have been close to where he's at?
I've always wondered if there's an unsolved either break-in, burglary. Typically, people don't just start out mass murdering 4 people, but in other words, practicing getting into a place stealthily. And it seems like he would be that sort of person. And I say that because we know he has not only criminology background education-wise, but now we know with that application that he actually had formal training and, as you know, did police work. So he's been instructed on how to conduct surveillance. And it would make sense to me that he may have practiced. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know if they'll ever be able to link him.
Yeah. I think maybe that's why, if that's true, that could be why he has a little bit of confidence in this case. New Balance shoes.
Tyler, if he doesn't bring his own phone, and if he actually, even that wasn't the big mistake. It was one mistake, and that's that sheath.
Yeah.
He left the sheath. If he doesn't leave that sheath, all the DNA that would have been at that place would have been astronomical. But that was the big break that was needed.
The sheath was a big break. I wonder, though, what your thoughts are, because he keeps saying he's confident in his exoneration. He said it twice now. Looking forward to be exonerated, confident he's going to be exonerated. Is there a possibility that he would have used a different knife and left a sheath there that doesn't match the knife used as a way to throw doubt in the jury's mind? That's the only thing I could think of. I think he did it by accident and left it there. That's my predominant theory. But am I just rolling it in my brain? Is there a chance that he left it on purpose to throw people off,
I don't think there's any chance in the world he left it there on purpose. I think we're going to see that he failed to affix it to himself. I picture him stealthily walking in. You want to have a sheath on your knife, especially one that is this sharp, to commit this kind of an act. And then he undid it, and in the fury and flurry, of committing these heinous crimes.
Mm-hmm.
It probably was tucked in his pocket,
Oh,
and it came out. And I don't think he probably even realized it, because if you were exiting, you would also have it in your hand. And I know some people are saying, but then why didn't Dylan Mortensen not see it? Well, Dylan Mortensen had tunnel vision, and tunnel
yeah,
vision, we were lucky she saw bushy eyebrows, because it's
yeah,
very focused. And so anyway, I think he realized it later, and maybe that could have contributed to him coming back, wondering, did I drop it on the
yeah.
way to my car?
That's what I was thinking. Like, then he probably went back at 9 a.m. either to see, well, probably to see, could I get back in and get that, or what's the situation around the house right now? Oh
Yeah, or
man, that's wild.
I don't think he would have ever gone back in there, but did he, now it's light. Did I drop it right where I got in my car, or on the way to the
Yeah,
car from the house? And then I agree with you, just sheer curiosity. Why aren't there ambulances, sirens? Why aren't I hearing about this on the news?
man. New Balance, dark, 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 dark. I'm assuming they're just grabbing everything that's dark.
They sure are. I think it's going to be unlikely that he would have kept his clothing, but I think it's possible. Um, I really believe he got out of that clothing that night, which is where that shovel comes into play, right? The shovel in the car. I find it
Yeah,
very interesting he took that shovel. But they're going to take everything dark on the chance that that he either had the exact same clothing. Remember, we don't know what those clothing receipts were for. Well, what if it was for four of those particular style pants? Or what's the make that was on that receipt? Do you remember, Tyler?
I put it
Uh,
up.
we had this was on a previous receipt. It was on the receipt from the
Oh, you're talking
department.
about, yeah, the Carhartt.
Yeah. What if
Yeah,
on that receipt he bought three of them, and now
yeah,
they sees these, and they're exactly like the one that's
yeah.
missing? All of these are reasons why they took all of that.
Dickies. Somebody in the comment was saying Dickies.
Yes,
That's what it was, I think. Yeah,
yeah, I think it was Dickies. Thank you.
I think. Yeah, I thought like actually it was Dickies. I was thinking Carhartt, but they're very similar. Another laptop with damage, and then there's the receipt for that Glock 22, which goes to your theory of it being a newer purchase. Item photographed but not taken. I thought that was interesting that it was noted like that, but it must have been something that they couldn't take or didn't want to take. A note in desk, criminal psychology book, documents, extra large Columbia, Navy fleece, a man's hand drawing, which is really weird. And then I don't understand this last one, 10 curls inside the glove, inside of a box.
Well, that could be the honeypot if
Right.
if it really is. Did he cut a lock of hair off of any of his victims? Did he do that? Is that a curl, like, a hair curl? I don't know what he means by that. Um, I've seen misspellings and difficulty in reading a lot of his writing in other places. So is that a misinterpretation of the words on that sheet of paper? But that's what comes to mind for me.
We thought last night when we were looking through it, we thought it said ID cards inside of a glove, inside of a box.
Actually, that makes much more sense, Tyler, because
Okay.
they would have taken all ID cards related to him. So if indeed it said curl, and again, the writing of this agent was lacking in terms of legibility. So while it looks like curl, card to me makes so much more sense.
When we were going through the handwritten list, we had somebody watching the live stream that works in a doctor's office, and she's used to reading prescriptions. So she was able to decipher a lot of them for us. I was like, I have no idea what these say. But she said ID cards inside of a glove, inside of a box, which I don't know who stores their ID cards inside of gloves, inside of a box.
No, I agree. I think that it could be one of those two. Either way, obviously they would have taken it. Much more interesting if it's a curl, but if it's cards, it's just going to be different cards related to him.
And again, this is just what they took from the house in Pennsylvania. We have no idea what they took inside of 1122 King Road. I mean, there could be all kinds of things that are pointing to him, and we just know about the piece of DNA on the sheath. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Another computer, dark clothes in the laundry basket, a Taylor cutlery knife with a leather sheath, 4 swabs, 2 pair of dark colored boots, pair of brown boots. Anything sticking out to you about that?
Not really, except for, again, this, theme of dark clothing. And again, I'm going to have boots and dark clothes in my kit bag.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like he may have used the Vans as shoes if it was him, and, it looked like there was a Vans footprint, but there could be other kinds of shoes that have diamond footprints in the bottom of it too. Not likely to be boots.
I've looked, and the Nike has truly a diamond pattern, but they were very specific about Vans. But then I always caution myself, well, they were very specific about the year and make of the car.
Sure.
And they got that wrong. 2011 through 13, it ended up being a 15. So as they did their analysis of that latent footprint, it wasn't easily seen. Remember, they had to use different chemicals to extract it. Is it truly a Vans, or could it be a Nike? In either event, they would want to take a shoe because of shoe size.
When after you went through that the first time, what were the major pieces of information that were really sticking out to you?
Well, certainly, and we talked about it a lot already, the whole curl versus card. I think we all want to think, hopefully it's, we want to think from the standpoint of cards, because that seems just less terrible that he took a souvenir. Yeah. But then when you look at it logically, you already said it, why would you put cards in a glove? So then you're wondering, did he take locks of that, put it in there and conceal it? So I found that interesting. I found, to me, it's just the sum of the whole. I don't think these are normal items necessarily that people have, these ski masks, the hats, so I think it could be quite relevant. The knives, yes, some men have multiple knives, some do. But when you look at it in this context, and then the newly purchased gun, I found that very, very interesting as to why.
Yeah, I have multiple knives. One of my close friends is a professional knife maker. So by product of that, you just, you kind of get into the world of knives, but it feels a little bit different. I don't have a bunch of masks either, or a kit like you're talking about. And we don't know if he has a kit, but that's a good assumption.
No, we don't know. We just, he could put it together to make one. Let's put it that way. And don't forget the flash that they found on his person and the surgical glove.
Oh yeah, the flashlights. There was a surgical glove that was listed on that as well, and then there was a flashlight. Somebody told me that brand of flashlight that they found is able to detect blood, or they make a version that's able to detect blood. Did you hear that?
No, I'm not familiar with that, but I know it's a very good light. The lumens are strong. I'm kind of a flashlight geek. I like lots of flashlights. When I was on the team, particularly, whenever different companies would come out and want the team to test out lights, I didn't really care about the gloves, and I didn't care about the holsters. But I'm like, I'll check them out. So yeah, I do. I like flashlights, and that's a good one.
A good flashlight goes a long way. The thing that's interesting about him having it on his person, right, was that it was the middle of the night when they busted in the house. Like, who sleeps with the flashlight on their person in the middle of the night?
Well, and the shoes and just everything. But he was a night owl. We know that. I know in the research for that paper I did, Tyler, he's a night owl, and a lot of people are night owls. That doesn't make them nefarious. It's kind of one of these things that you just put it all together, and it does paint a certain picture, not necessarily of a murderer, but you certainly get what he was into. He was into knives. Now he's got a gun. He's got all this black clothing,
Yeah.
hat,